In 1931, a small farmhouse on the Isle of Man became the center of one of the strangest paranormal cases ever reported. The Irving family claimed something had moved into their home. Not a ghost, not a demon, a mongoose. But this mongoose could speak. It whispered through the walls. It sang songs. It mocked visitors. And it insisted that it was, in its own words, an extra clever mongoose. Investigators arrived hoping to expose a hoax. Journalists came to hear the mysterious voice. But almost no one ever saw the creature itself. And nearly a century later, the case of Jeff the Talking Mongoose remains one of the most baffling paranormal cases ever recorded. Tonight on The Midnight Drive, the Dalby Spook. Our story begins in 1931 at a remote farmhouse called Cashin's Gap, near the village of Dalby on the Isle of Man. The house sat in a quiet stretch of countryside overlooking the Irish Sea. It belonged to the Irving family. James Irving, his wife Margaret, and their teenage daughter Vori lived there in relative isolation. Their nearest neighbors were scattered across the surrounding farmland. Life was quiet, routine, until the noises began. At first, they sounded like the sort of thing any farmhouse might produce: scratching inside the walls, rustling in the attic. James Irving assumed it was a rat, or perhaps even a ferret. But the noises didn't behave like animals. They seemed deliberate. The sounds moved through the house, from the attic to the walls, from the walls to the bedrooms. And eventually, the noises began to resemble something else. Words. At first, they were faint and difficult to understand. Fragments of speech. Whispers in the dark. And then one night, the voice spoke clearly. It introduced itself. "My name is Jeff," the voice said. And according to the family, Jeff was a mongoose. But not just any mongoose. "I am an extra clever mongoose," the voice declared. And Jeff seemed determined to demonstrate just how very clever he was. The creature talked constantly. It sang songs. It whistled. It even recited bits of newspaper headlines. Sometimes it repeated conversations the family had earlier in the day. At other times, it launched into strange monologues about its travels. Jeff claimed he had once lived in India before arriving on the Isle of Man. He described himself as a small animal with yellow fur and a long bushy tail. And he insisted that he could run incredibly fast, but he rarely allowed anyone to see him. Instead, Jeff preferred to stay hidden, speaking from inside the walls, from behind furniture, or from the dark corners of the house. Over time, the voice developed a personality. Sometimes, Jeff was playful. He told jokes. He sang nonsense songs. But other times, he was deeply unpleasant. He insulted visitors. He mocked neighbors. He shouted crude remarks at anyone who questioned his existence. One visitor later described the voice as sounding like an elderly man with a rasping whisper, which was particularly strange because the voice was supposedly coming from a mongoose. The Irving family insisted that Jeff could see and hear everything happening around the house. If someone approached the property, Jeff would announce their arrival before they reached the door. He repeated private conversations. He commented on events happening in nearby villages. And according to the family, he sometimes revealed information he should not have known. For the Irvings, Jeff became part of everyday life. They spoke with him. They argued with him. They listened to him singing late at night. But outside the farmhouse, people were beginning to hear rumors. A talking animal living inside a house on the Isle of Man? It sounded ridiculous. And the story began spreading. First, through the local community. Then, through newspapers. And eventually, investigators began arriving at Cashin's Gap to see if the story was real. Now, all of these stories that we talk about on the Midnight Drive always have some sort of element where the experts get called in. Are they going to uncover a hoax? The experts sure hope so. In this case, especially, a talking mongoose? Can you imagine? You imagine this happening in 2026? In modern times, an animal claiming to be a very clever animal living inside of your walls. What would you do if all of a sudden, one night you're having dinner and through your wall, you heard an animal? You didn't know it was an animal at the time, but it just declares, it introduces itself so articulately. And then what? What are you supposed to do with that? You've got somebody living in your walls? Nowadays, I know that frogging is something that is a valid concern, especially in old houses that haven't been occupied in a long time. If you heard somebody announce that they were living in your walls, and they said it so boldly and articulately, I think that would be something to be genuinely afraid of, a literal person living in your walls. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. If you want to drop us a line, go ahead and send us a message or leave us a message on our hotline, 402-610-2836. Next, we're going to get into what the investigators uncovered and the problem of Jeff, right here on the Midnight Drive. And we're back on the Midnight Drive. Tonight, we're venturing to the Isle of Man. We're talking about the Dalby spook, also known as Jeff the Mongoose. In this segment, we're going to be getting into what the investigators found and exactly what the problem of Jeff the Mongoose was. By the mid-1930s, the story of Jeff the Talking Mongoose had become a minor sensation. Reporters traveled to the Isle of Man hoping to hear the voice for themselves. Newspapers in Britain began publishing articles about the mysterious creature living in the Irving farmhouse. Some visitors claimed they also did. Others were left disappointed. The voice, it seemed, had a habit of disappearing when strangers arrived. Seems convenient, yeah? But eventually, the case attracted the attention of serious investigators. One of them was Harry Price, one of the most famous paranormal researchers in Britain at the time. Price had investigated haunted houses, mediums, and poltergeist cases across Europe. The story of Jeff intrigued him. In 1935, Price and another investigator, Richard Lambert, began examining the case. They interviewed the Irving family. They inspected the house. They looked for physical evidence of the mysterious mongoose. But during their visit, something unusual happened. They never heard the voice. Despite spending time in the house and speaking with the family at length, the investigators did not experience the strange conversations described in newspaper reports. What they did find were a few ambiguous clues. The Irving family claimed had occasionally seen Jeff darting across rooms or through the yard. They also provided several small hairs they believed belonged to the creature. These samples were later analyzed. The results were disappointing. The hairs belonged to a dog. As the investigation continued, skeptics began proposing a more simple explanation. The voice might not belong to a mongoose at all. It might belong to one Vori Irving, the family's teenage daughter. Skeptics suggest that Vori might have been practicing ventriloquism, the art of projecting the voice so it appears to come from somewhere else. If she had learned the technique, she could make the voice sound as if it were coming from inside the walls or from another room entirely. Now I don't know a lot about ventriloquism, but how I understand that it works, especially in modern times, even since the dawning of PA systems and microphones, the ventriloquist has a microphone. And the dummy might have a little, faux microphone on its lapel. But it always comes back to the ventriloquist making the sounds with his own voice or her own voice. And the illusion, of course, you put another microphone in front of the ventriloquist dummy, but there's still a lapel microphone on the ventriloquist. It's all a really, really wonderful act. The whole concept of a person throwing their own voice, I don't know has ever been real. I don't know that that's a thing. I'll need to research it more, of course, but I would be so curious to hear if, one, you have ever heard anybody legitimately throw their voice in a convincing way. You're having a conversation with somebody, and then it sounds like somebody is behind you. Have you ever had a conversation with somebody who has these ventriloquism skills that has convinced you that there is somebody behind you? That's perplexing to me. I think it would be amazing to encounter that, but personally, I never have. Now, to many investigators, that explanation seemed reasonable, but it raised a question that still lingers today. If the voice was a trick, how did it last for years? Why did some visitors insist they heard it so clearly? And why did the story persist, even after investigators began expressing doubt? Even those who suspected a hoax admitted that the case was unusual. Unlike many paranormal stories, the Irving family never tried to charge money for visitors. They didn't write books. They didn't turn the case into a traveling spectacle. They simply continued living in the farmhouse while insisting that Jeff remained there, talking, watching, and occasionally singing. Over time, the media attention faded. Investigators moved on to other cases, and the story of the talking mongoose slowly drifted into the strange corners of paranormal folklore. Today, most historians believe the case was a clever trick. A voice thrown through the walls of a farmhouse by an imaginative teenager. But the mystery has never completely disappeared. Because even the skeptics admitting something strange about the story. Not the voice, not the mongoose, but the way the whole case unfolded. It was a family living in isolation. It was a strange voice inside the walls. Visitors arrived with expectations of the supernatural. And slowly over time, the line between curiosity, belief, and performance all began to blur. Jeff the Talking Mongoose remains one of the strangest paranormal cases ever recorded. A creature that spoke, joked, and argued with a family in a farmhouse on the Isle of Man. Most researchers today believe the explanation is simple. A clever trick, a thrown voice, a story that grew larger than the people who first told it. But even so, the case leaves behind an unsettling question, because sometimes the most fascinating mysteries are not about ghosts or monsters. Sometimes they're about the strange and creative ways human beings construct reality. And once a story begins to take shape, it can be very difficult to tell where the voice is really coming from.